It's time for
Scripts and Scriptures Disclaimers.
Jean Verhoeven here with some very important information. My panel and I just finished watching this film. Some people use this show to see if they want to see the movie, and some people watch the movie first and then listen to us. The list is available at wicxradio.org. If you're part of the first group, then
beware, there are plot spoilers in the following discussion.
We also have to tell you, while we think they are smart, witty, insightful, and profound, our opinions are solely ours and do not reflect the management, staff, or board of WICX or affiliated radio groups, or maybe even you. However, our panel is very proud of the results. We are not theologians or apologists, but we are movie fans and hope you are too. Enjoy. Ready? Lights, camera, action!
Take one. That clapboard tells us it's time for Scripts and Scriptures. I'm Jean Verhoeven. We will be watching spiritually inspired films and shows and discussing the quality, insight, value, and enjoyment. I'm so happy to welcome this week. We have Susan Stevens, Lloyd Kins, Daniel Saletti, who's host of his own movie show, and Charlie Saletti. So welcome everybody. This is so cool. For the first time, I don't have to ask the question about is fictionalizing a story okay? Because this time we actually have a true story. And it had twists and it had turns and conflict and success. In fact, Lee Strobel himself has said that the movie is 85% accurate. It particularly focuses on his strained relationship with his wife. The movie is The Case for Christ. It's a 2017 American Christian drama film directed by John Gunn and written by Brian Bird, based on a true story that was inspired by the 1998 book of the same name by Lee Strobel. The film stars Mike Vogel, Erica Christensen, Faye Dunaway, and Robert Forster, and follows an atheist journalist who looks to disprove his wife's Christian faith. In 1980, Lee Strobel is an atheist journalist and investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune. He and his wife Leslie have a daughter named Allison and are expecting their second child. After getting a very special recognition, Lee and his family go out to celebrate with dinner, where Allison chokes on a piece of candy. One of the patrons, a nurse named Alfie, intervenes and saves Allison, and she credits the event to God's will, which Leslie takes to heart. Leslie and Alfie become friends and start attending a Christian church together. Irritated, Lee unsuccessfully tries to dissuade Leslie. On advice from his mentor, Lee sets out to find evidence that proves the resurrection of Jesus did not happen. Lee tries to get more evidence, but his mentor explains that whether he chooses to believe or not believe, the last part of proving his real existence is faith. When a colleague gives him a speech, Lee decides to take the leap of faith and believe. It is actually more of a biopic than apologetic. So, are there any real coincidences in life? Now, I'm referring in the movie to when the nurse just happens to have gone to that restaurant after she was going somewhere else. But are there coincidences in life? Was it luck? Do you think the nurse was supposed to be there? Now, I already know what Susan's going to say, because we had this conversation a few weeks ago when I met her on the street. There's no coincidence here. What do you say? Still believe that?
Repeating myself, yes. I don't believe in, there are no coincidences. And that that nurse was supposed to be there. And to me, it's God gives these signs. And for the wife, she saw it as a sign. For Lee, took a little longer, but no, there wasn't. There are no such things as coincidences.
Anybody else? Was it just luck, or okay? So
well, I'd have to agree with Sue that clearly, if you're accepting the divine, then you really don't accept complete coincidences.
I personally think it happens all day, every day. You know, I say, oh, good, I got that parking spot, or good, I found the book I was looking for, or something. And I often tie it back to divine intervention. I know as a cradle Catholic, it's hard for me to realize that, and the number is higher than ever, which is the scary part, that people and children today they don't just deny God, but they haven't even heard of him. I know of a family with a little girl, and she heard on the TV something about Santa's visits. And somebody in the room corrected her, or corrected the announcer, saying he only went to Christian children, Christian homes. And the little girl, she panicked and ran to her mother. "Are we Christians?" And the mother said, "Oh yes," said the mother, rescuing the hope of Santa's visit. The only problem was the mother was an atheist, and the absent father a fallen away Catholic. The kids had no clue what the true meaning of Christmas was. I kept my mouth shut, but it was enlightening, and not in a good way. Can one find Christ without help? And can you find it without a church, without help? And if you don't have it from, your cradle Christian or cradle Catholic?
It takes a long time without help. It's not necessarily intuitive. A life experience might bring it to you, but really it's important to have a structured introduction to finding Christ.
You've got to have faith.
Yeah.
Which is going to be said a lot in this.
That helps, but if you don't have, I won't even say like catechism, if you don't have exposure to it, and nowadays it's less and less and less. I think they say atheism is the fastest growing, quote, religion, which is kind of contradictory, but.
Well, that's an interesting question, because the atheism itself is born of ignorance. I mean, in the movie, it's a really interesting thing. Can one find Christ without help? And we have two stories of one person who accepted the help of, in this case, Alfie, the Christian friend who offered to guide Alfie, or guide Alfie to
guide Les, I think,
or Les to
Leslie.
Christ, Leslie to Christ, and the story of Lee, who got there, but with a lot more work. But he was doing it because he was looking. He was looking in hopes of finding nothing, but he found something. But most atheists don't even look.
That's true. In the background, we hear the preacher saying, "You can believe in God, but what does it mean if to not just believe, you must receive him?" What did he mean by that?
Well, as after you become Christian, you understand the receiving part. It's the transformation that comes with becoming a Christian is the receiving part of it. Otherwise, you could list the facts, the dates, the times, the events, but until you receive them as a personal part of your existence, it's not the same.
And this was obviously a very Protestant angle on things. It wasn't meant to be a Catholic movie, but I think I've mentioned before, one of my favorite shows is The Journey Home, and it is fascinating to hear how not only atheists and Protestants and non-Christians, but my favorite one is when we get a clergyman from another religion, and they find their way home. It's amazing that to finally get to the Catholic Church. Is it possible? Can you live a just the facts, ma'am life when it comes to God? That's what Lee was striving for. Just the facts, ma'am.
Well, I think it goes back to the previous question, just the facts. You can believe Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, and that's the facts. But to receive him, you have to open your heart for the Holy Spirit. So that's a different, you have to be, was it in your heart and your mind and your soul?
Good point. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, there's nothing like parenthood to make you recall God consider God or scream out for help when the baby won't stop crying and you haven't slept in 3 nights and the bills are calling and dinner is burning.
I resent that.
Is there something in parenthood that often brings the, what I would call on hiatus 20-somethings back to the church? You see a lot of young people,
Yes.
they leave, and then all of a sudden the children start to arrive 10 years later, and it's like, oh, maybe we should go back.
Well, as the 20-something here,
Yes. Without children.
without children, without a wife, without anybody, the
Life of Riley.
yeah. Well, you look at somewhere like at school where I went. It was I was probably the only person that actually went to any form of church at school at Keene State. I mean, you look at that. Yes, I had people who said that they went to some form of a church before, and then that some that say they try to go. But I was probably the one that went regularly. And I mean, there is a Catholic church literally 7 minutes out from my dorm to their door, to the church door. 7-minute walk from my door to the church door. So it wasn't that far for those Catholics.
Other than the short walk, what do you attribute it to that you went without your parents saying, now you make sure you go to church?
Oh, the lightning bolt probably would have struck at some point.
You're probably right.
Also, I mean, why break with tradition? Why break with routine?
Is that really all it is? Routine?
No. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's not the part of it. I'm not going to be the person to knock on every door of people I know and people I don't know saying, hey, you want to come to church with me? It's going to be cool. 8 o'clock in the morning. When most people don't wake up until 1 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So that would be another problem. That would most likely be another reason they wouldn't go. No, I mean, it's of course the reason because you're there for the obvious reasons. So, yeah, yes, there are those people when around that age who will not go, but maybe when they become parents, they'll go back to either their church or our church.
Okay.
So for you personally, you felt something would be missing.
Yeah.
If you did not go to church.
Exactly.
It was such a part of your life.
It was.
Thank you for helping him out with that.
It had a reason to get dressed up, had a reason to go to church, had a reason to get up in the morning, had a reason to go see God, had a reason to meet people.
Have donuts, I know.
No, that wasn't. I didn't say that. Although we did get them.
In a way, I felt kind of bad for Lee when his partner in atheism, that was his wife, started shattering their nice, calm world. And I'm sure many families are torn this way. I also believe it's more often someone is turning away from God instead of turning to God or church. And, she was turning toward God. I think what tears a lot of people apart is when they turn away from God. A lot of people whose adult children have left the church or their spouse or whatever. I think that can be heartbreaking. I thought this was interesting. Benefiting from something doesn't make it real. And the example they gave was gravity. And disliking something does not make it non-existent. And they use mosquitoes as the example. What I want and what I don't want has no impact on truth. However, when it came to this story and other things, who has the facts? Does history have the facts? Does the church have the facts? Is it Wikipedia? Or is it our hearts that really count? Where is the important part in here?
I think I saw the facts in the history, and then the heart part of it can cause you to reject or ignore. But history has facts, and as I see the church, it's a continuation of the Holy Scriptures. We had the Holy Scriptures first, and then there was a time in history, and after that we had the church. So I think history is a solid.
It gives it a foundation, for sure.
I mean, there are historical records of religious parts, and I mean, they do blend together. I mean, you look at other films, like even fun films, like Indiana Jones. They are history films, but they're also religious films because the two blend together. You can't have one without the other because they're a historical fact.
And the fact they mentioned, when it said John was written within his lifetime, the Gospel according to John.
Right.
So this is a first-person source.
Yeah.
And it matches up to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So all the disciples scattered, go forth
Right.
and, spread the good news. So they wrote that all independently and had the basic facts were the same.
I often think
So
of,
that is the...
I know it's at least once, and I think it's at the end of after the resurrection and all that, or maybe it's after the crucifixion, but there's, I think, twice in the Gospels, this is the, how is it? This is the testimony of an eyewitness, and this eyewitness is true. And it's interesting they put that right in there.
Was it Luke? Of course, I don't know. One was an attorney or something, that he did the evidence. Luke was very, I think...
Luke was a doctor, wasn't he?
Doctor or something, that he wrote down everything. He was very prolific. And so everything he wrote down was... you could tell that he just put the facts in. That's why I like reading Luke. It's just the facts. He doesn't flourish, it's the facts.
Another thing that happens in the history investigation in the situation of our movie, they focus on the crucifixion and resurrection. But another approach would be to go back to all the biblical languages, the Arabic, the Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin, and see how that story carries forward.
That's right, because sometimes literally things do change in translation, missing in translation. Isn't that one of the discrepancies or the arguments about is it thou shalt not kill or is it thou shalt not murder? And that's just one example.
Murder, kill.
No, there is a difference though.
Yeah.
Speaking of these experts, when one of them, and I'm sure if you wanted to make it a 6-hour movie, they could have trotted out each expert's real proof or evidence, because these were real guys represented in the movie. But one of them says that, and to me it sounds like he's hedging his bets, because he says if the resurrection means being with his dead wife, then he's okay with that. Is that believing? Is that really? Is that really believing in the resurrection, or is that just saying, well?
Saying you don't need to investigate any further.
Well, wasn't that
Keep his mouth
Descartes' sort of quip at the church? Well, it's safer to believe than not to believe.
Right.
It's which I don't think was being serious when he said it, but that there is that. But if you believe, ultimately, at some point, it has to be this isn't like believing in a physical phenomenon. It's the divine and your own immortality, and that sooner or later you'll decide you have to act on that.
Mm-hmm.
It almost sounds like that phrase and the description almost kind of sounds like something just to keep your mouth shut, sort of, but also could be seen as believing, maybe.
But it's an atheist. It's impossible to prove a negative. So an atheist doesn't have a leg to stand on. There's no God. So I don't really think there's any atheists, because how do you prove a negative on that?
Well, as they said, that was a leap of faith as much
to be an atheist, right.
Being an atheist is as much a leap of faith as being a believer.
Right.
Their motto, or I don't know, what's the other M word?
Mantra?
Mantra, yeah, mantra. Their motto or their mantra is prove it. Prove it. Prove it.
Mm-hmm.
So
I loved the line, you're cheating on me with Jesus. But that's how Lee felt. He felt his marriage was being broken up, and guess who the other man was? So he thought he was losing Leslie, not to mention that she was just losing it. Was he? Was she? Was she losing it? Was he losing her?
In a way, certainly there's some information missing here. What we seem to have found out, what we have found out is that in a couple, if they both put Jesus first, then they can deal with anything. And here one has put Jesus first, and the second one hasn't got there yet. So
that's very good.
That makes
line,
it an accurate line.
Yeah, we were amazed one year. We went to 3 weddings in 1 year, and 2 of the 3 were 100% secular. And I just, it hurt me, because I feel, you guys, you're missing such a dimension, such a facet of a true loving marriage, to not have three of you in the marriage, you, your spouse, and God, that I just, if you're not a believer, you're not a believer. But if you are and you don't include him, oh my goodness, I think it makes all the difference in good times and in bad.
It's funny because you mentioned that. This is very early on. I was in college. Friends got married, and this was in the 70s, and it was, was it marry something, love as long as we love, or something like that. And I remember we were sitting there taking bets how long this was going to last. As long as we love, right? Oh. You know how was it the vows until
death do us part?
Death do us part, as long as we love, or something.
Yeah. Are they together?
I don't know.
Oh, we gotta find that out.
No, it's one of those ones in the rose garden. Everybody goes in the rose garden. And you're like, okay, where's the cake?
The other reason, at least for the wedding examples, I mean, could be also just to be maybe accepted by everyone because, don't want to talk religion or politics, don't want to get there.
Hey, it's your wedding. You don't have to be PC for other people.
But the guests you invite, they might like...
Well, then they don't have to come. We went to a wedding where they read Dr. Seuss as part of the ceremony, and I thought, oh boy. But okay, hey, if they're happy.
Hey, that's an inspirational man.
That's true.
Don't get on his case, for Christ.
Reading the book, however, we see that Lee recounts this case merely to demonstrate 2 points. The first is evidence can be aligned to point in more than one direction, but when you change the lenses, in other words, he was trading his biases for an attempt at objectivity, he saw the case in a whole new light. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, Lee says, my spiritual journey has been a lot like my experience with James Dixon. It is not surprising, then, that the movie utilizes the Dixon case, although they change his name to Hicks in the movie, to help tell the story of Lee's journey to faith. And it does a very good job of it, actually, and while also utilizing apologetics effectively. Can you see the parallel between James Hicks, Dixon originally, but Hicks in the movie, and Lee's road that he took?
Yeah, well, that was, of course, a very... I presumably the both events are true. So, but if they weren't, it's almost so coincidental as to be crafted because there was a clear parallel of in his pursuing the story about the shooting. His first version or view of the facts led him to one conclusion, and he was certain enough of it that he would stake his whole reputation on it and publish it and convince his boss that it was ready to go ahead. And just as his first view of Christianity, he would stake his whole reputation and his belief in that it couldn't be real. And then, but because he was persistent in pursuing everything down to the very end, in both cases, he changed his mind.
But as an investigative journalist, technically, he should not have had those biases in the beginning. He shouldn't have had those assumptions of the guy being guilty or Leslie being ridiculous. However, he's still a human being, and it's very hard to get rid of them entirely. We have a journalism major graduate right here, and I hope they taught you that, even though sometimes in today's journalism it's not always that way. But then he himself said when he changed those lenses, it was the same evidence, but it was a different conclusion.
But he got played, though, because remember in the hospital?
That's true.
He said, I would look at the shooter, take his view off of him.
Yeah, by the cop was playing.
Right.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, I don't think even the word religion came up in any of the journalism classes that I took. I don't think, anyway. And if they did, they weren't negative, from what I remember. I see there is a slight, maybe stretch similarity between the case, the prisoner, the shooter, and Lee's case for Christ, because if you look at it, we're not quite sure if this guy shot the officer or not. Mm-hmm. And it really does look like, in the end, spoiler, he did not shoot him. And he's being wrongfully accused and being sentenced for something that he did for something he did not do, for something he did absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence disappointing that he was.
Does this sound familiar? Does it sound like the guy that Lee is actually trying to prove? Because it sounds like a lot like another guy who was wrongfully accused and sentenced.
I think that's not the direction he was going there.
I know.
I see the similarity.
I see where I'm going
Hicks
with
is a
this.
Christ figure in this one, but yeah.
It's just a slight, maybe.
A hint.
Did you catch that?
Yeah.
There's a parallel, but I'm not sure that's.
That's what I took out of it.
I see your point. As an engineer, I support his course in going to factual experts. But his tact sort of backfired on what he was trying to prove. He was trying to prove the opposite of what he concluded. So, was that the right way to do it? And would you have gone that way if you were in his shoes?
I think going to experts is an excellent thing to do. It's the most efficient way. If the experts don't agree, then you got a real problem. But when they come together, you get a synergistic result.
Well, one expert said, when is enough evidence enough to prove your point? So, when is it enough? Do you think you would have stopped at the same point that Lee did when he was hearing all the recap in his head?
Well, I think that is the point. You will never have enough evidence. You can go find all the facts or, again, dig up all the treasures you want and say, like, here's the fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. Or here's the point where he said that and then it was dropped down to that and written in here and blah, 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 blah. You won't ever have enough evidence. Again, you can say it as a laugh, but say it as truth as well. You gotta have faith, honestly, because you won't have enough evidence. Like, here's the ark, here it is. Okay, great. Do you actually believe it? Or did some jerk dig it up in bury it in the sand?
Those thunderbolts and flying things help.
I don't know, but
The one person who did was the archaeologist who became a priest.
Yeah, exactly. And there you go.
But the rest were older people who are spending their whole lives researching
And one guy's a medical
this.
doctor.
That it's not enough. You spend your whole life getting the evidence.
Right. I believe, personally, if you haven't had some form of doubt in your faith at some point, you're not doing it right. Some would say I'm all wrong. Faith is faith, and you shouldn't waver. I admit that there have been times when I've had to decide, like every morning, that morning, yes, indeed, I am a believer. And get up the next morning and say, yep, yes, I am a believer. But let's just say I couldn't take it for granted. I had to make the decision. Other times, and this is usually at the beginning of grief, I've just lost somebody close to me, I've actually questioned the afterlife. Well, which of course is the whole enchilada. If there's no afterlife, there's no resurrection, there's no salvation, and guess what? There's no Catholicism.
Again, the Mormons have it pretty good with that planet.
Yes, they do.
With that planet, I don't know.
But I can honestly say, and it was the Blessed Mother herself that got those thoughts out of my head. If you, and okay, here's my engineering head. If one accepts Marian visitations in the flesh as real and true, well, she is a departed human being, but she's coming from somewhere to us. It's coming back from someplace. Evidently, she is alive and sometimes here. But one footnote to my journeys. This is kind of silly, but even when my doubts were the most active, I found myself praying to God to help me believe, so I guess I sort of kind of really never gave up. Because that was my first reaction. Please help me!
One of my favorite books is C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, where the apprentice is writing to Uncle Screwtape, and his job, the apprentice, is putting doubt.
Ah, okay.
And you get a bigger prize when you put doubt in a believer.
Ooh.
You want to go for the believers, because
Right.
I don't know, you get a bigger prize or something.
Is it okay, as a Catholic, as a Christian, is it okay to doubt, ever?
Yes.
Okay.
Because God gave you a mind, gave you free will, and it's always returning back to God.
And I think you come back stronger,
You do.
myself.
You step back, one step back, and two step forward to me.
That's
You
nice.
always have to.
The answer is
Doubt is natural.
Yeah.
Just part of how you separate the the true from the untrue sometimes.
Or you'd be like a golden retriever. You know, you just never doubt. You know.
The answer is yes. ... But you come back here now.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes. ...
Yes, ...
But you come back here now.
Well, is the disciple, Lord, do you love me? Yes, I love you.
Ah.
Or, do you love me? Yes, do you love me?
Do you?
I mean, this is a disciple.
Yeah, the big guy.
The big guy, right?
Can a non-believer spouse, can they survive a new zealous convert partner? I mean, and we've got two converts sitting here at the very beginning of conversion. There's nothing, and it doesn't even have to be religion necessarily. It could be somebody on a new diet plan or somebody in a new kind of music or something. Converts are always the most zealous, but it's very true of religious converts. So, can an unbeliever spouse survive?
Well, in the secular world,
As a non-believer, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a true test of faith, because I mean, I suppose we all have seen marriages of all sorts, so I suppose people find a way to make it work, but one would think that usually one or the other would change, and I don't know if there's any stats on which way it goes more often.
I think Lee thought he had two choices: convert himself or cut bait and what is it? Cut bait and cut.
Fish and cut bait.
Fish and cut bait, yeah.
Because
And
they were on such
lever,
extremes.
and lever,
They
right.
were on extremes.
Yeah, and their paths were so close when they were dating and married early, and then all of a sudden, boom, this great big Y in the road, and they were going down different roads.
And it was interesting in the movie, the way they depicted it. The problem, she didn't have the problem. She was happy to wait for him.
Yeah, loved him more, she said.
He had the problem, and which drove him in his search, I suppose, which is ultimately a good thing. But it was interesting that she wasn't the one saying convert or I have to cut you loose. Yeah.
That's right.
She was being nice.
Yeah,
She was
loving.
Yeah, she never said you should come to church with me or anything like that.
Yeah, that's true. I personally wanted to kind of slug Lee when he said to the nurse who had saved his child and told her to back off. Do you think that was called for? Was it human nature? Was it fair?
It was bad delivery.
Really bad, yeah. Especially at church, no less. He said this to her at
Felt very
church.
threatened by her.
Oh,
this
okay.
was Lee nature.
He may have been feeling he needed help or something, but he just chose the most inappropriate way to express himself.
I like the first scene where they're both, just two of them young, riding a motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see the next scene with, like, children. And so in his mind, it's you and me, babe, against the world.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, all these other things come between
She's
them.
cheating on him with the divine,
Right.
and and so forth. Okay, so yay, you found Christ, but your spouse threatens to leave if the conversation is the same in 2 years, which is exactly what happened between Lee and Les. What is right? Your wedding vows, which is basically a contract, or giving up an otherwise good marriage for something that you know is true? In this case, Les would have had to have left Lee, not Lee leaving Les. Say that a few times. Which carries more weight, your wedding vows or your newfound beliefs?
I think it's equal share.
Well, that's kind of how it worked out for Leslie, but I don't know if that would work for
I
everybody.
think it's maybe like a good foundation.
Well,
one, and then
I
extra
think
support.
Yeah, I agree. Les was the one who she just prayed for him and kept her faith. And if it wasn't going to work out, it was because he was going to leave. But she didn't say, "All right, I'm out of here." In that case,
I think vows with the newfound God foundation worked, but I'm not sure vows without that foundation was going to carry them through. Have you ever heard of the father wound, which is what they call missing and abusive fathers? And evidently a lot of famous men have had those kind of fathers. Do you think that could be part of the reason why we have so many absentee fathers today and who don't believe, and their children who don't believe?
I think when you have absentee fathers, you have that kind of problems. I don't think we're dealing with stress, and absentee fathers cause stress on relationships. It's not a simple one-sided activity.
That's right. How can you have the concept, the God, the Father, unconditional love who'll never leave you, if your own father left?
And it's not just if they leave. Sometimes,
Through death, they're gone,
through death, right? But
gone.
also if you have an abusive father, that's not going to make you all warm and fuzzy about God the Father.
Right.
We learned that in The Shack.
That's right.
Yep.
Exactly. And he was able to break the cycle in that one, thank goodness. But who knew there was a name for it? If you believe all the church teachings, like, do you think the resurrection, the miracle of the sun, the Marian apparitions, could they be mass hysteria?
Well, see, I was doing research on this, and no, it's again taking it into faith. Is the evidence there? You can certainly do research on it and certainly prove against it or prove that it is there. But if it's what you're taught, you can look into it, but you have to believe it.
Well, if the psychologist in the movie was correct in her analysis, basically this concept of mass hysteria just doesn't happen. Mass hysteria is more like everybody believing there are Martians and going to Grover's Mills and fighting them, but everyone seeing them, a mass hallucination, that's quite another thing. The first can happen quite easily, the second almost impossible.
Because there were, I think, if I'm remembering properly, I think tens of thousands of people at the Miracle of the Sun. And even if you're not a visionary of a Marian apparition, hundreds, if not thousands, of people have watched, usually the children, go through it and would see miracles in that sense. But there are people who would say, "Oh no, it's just some sort of psychotic episode or something."
It's all about passing it down.
When embracing evidence, likely, can we get played? Or do we let ourselves get played? Or is it different every time, maybe? But do you think that when he was receiving evidence about the shooting case he was working on, he got played, or did he let himself get played? And do we let ourselves get played? What do you think?
I think it's easy to get played. There's plenty of false things going on that are wanting to play on what we want to. The result that we want to find.
Right. Yeah. I think that there you go. I think if we go in with there's been scientists and studies and where scientists have gotten the answers that they wanted, that they were looking for, except they consciously or subconsciously, change the data.
When you get a data set and they do this, was it plus or minus standard deviation, where they start throwing out data. And so to me, they're like throwing out data because it could be just, then you're thinking, are they looking for something to support their theory?
Was Lee drinking and fighting because he knew he was right? Or would you say that he was at the point where he knew less was right and he was just going to go kicking and screaming to the truth? He was going to fight it tooth and nail.
I think it was just a case of immaturity, that he didn't know how to deal with something rationally. He had reached the limit and not able to come up with a reasonable reaction.
At least as he was depicted in the movie, he was a guy who was always right. He was the one who had a published book, won all the awards.
Yes.
He was never the guy who was wrong. And
he had a big head.
And he had a big head, And he was a little bit of a macho attitude, and maybe
The white
that
horse,
was,
right? Coming on the white horse. That's
you
right.
know, and so to find himself in a situation where he wasn't right, and even worse, his wife was the one who was right. Well, that was rocking his world. So yeah, a couple
You're
of
right.
beers was making that a little easier to take. Yeah.
We got to the one part in the movie that is my favorite part and also my least favorite part. And this was the description of what happens when you're scourged and crucified. And maybe you know that the crucifixion is to die from suffocation, ultimately. But I'm sure many of us don't know all the biology that's going on. The first time I heard the description in this movie, I was a little nauseous when I thought, as a sinner, I had contributed to this. And everyone knows it's brutal. And, it could be the worst possible death. But this film, very clinically, and without actually depicting it like other movies, very clinically hits you in the gut with the details. Was this a new or more thorough description for you? I mean, we've all heard the suffocation aspect of it, but was there more detail in there that you weren't aware of? I know for me it was.
Well, it confirmed one other thing, because it was, I've been reading a sort of a retranslation of the Gospel of Mark, and he is this guy who sort of did it as a hobby, just retranslating the Greek and making his close. But he put in lots and lots of detailed footnotes, and one of his sort of gruesome points was that, why did Pilate have Jesus scourged? And because, Pilate was apparently at least at least almost sympathetic, if not just disinterested. So why would he go and... But apparently that was part of the whole deal. Because if he didn't do that, it would take him days and days to die. So, so in a way, it was a bit of a mercy. In a gruesome way, it was a bit of a mercy.
And they said the Romans were very efficient killers.
Yeah. So they'd whip them within an inch of their life if they didn't want to leave them there for days and days on a cross.
Maybe that was just for they wanted to get the job done and go home.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were Romans, so they were a little bit cruel about things, but that was
wow. That's another whole
but that was
footnote, isn't it?
Sort of a twist on things that there was. It wasn't in addition to. It was part of the whole deal.
Right.
That begs the question again that I've heard tossed around all over the place from teachers to probably priests and other people. Is Pilate a good guy, and is he in the good place, or is he not? Because he was a bad man. Blah, 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 blah. As strange as this will sound, and as strange and as awful as it did sound, this is easier to swallow than actually seeing it.
Well, that's what I said.
Yes.
I mean, there are
we know your favorite movie.
impossible people we'll call them out there who like to do this type of thing, and nobody wants to see that.
But see, everybody's got a different path, and that's the director of that movie needed that for some reason, and atonement or something. But that's why I think
that's a whole other show.
I think hearing it in a clinical sense, very like it rips the skin apart, and then you lose so much blood, and then as you try to lift yourself up on the cross, the slivers of the wood go. Oh man,
and yet it's easier.
Yeah. Also, at the scene of the crime, if you will, blood and water that came out of the side of Christ is proof of death by suffocation or pericardial infusion, we know now, which cannot be faked. So there's no question whether he died on the cross. So that rules out coma, unconsciousness, and so forth. So there is proof of death. Now, what we need in the movie and in our own lives, I suppose, is we need proof of life. Documentaries on the Shroud of Turin just get better and better as the science gets better. And it's been said that the only way to get an image that you see on the shroud, because it's not paint. They've analyzed it all. It's not painted on. It's not all this and that. Would be a ridiculously huge blast of light.
Oh, well, that's why it's like a negative.
Yeah.
It's like a...
Yeah, and it's part of the fiber and the whole thing, and it's it would take something like that to make it. So, would you think that would have convinced Lee in his current state if he had known about
when
the photo imaging?
When he and the priest were looking at the shroud turn, or the picture of it,
yeah,
and there was a moment there where he was like, maybe thinking like, why is this a thing? Why are all these people actually going on if this is the closest thing to a picture of this guy? Maybe this isn't so fake and ridiculous as I thought. But I'm still going to play the fake and ridiculous card because I want to prove it even more. And then you realize at the end of the movie, when he's going through the final montage of all the people in his head, telling him all the recap facts, the last picture that he focuses on is the shroud, and that's where he says, "You win." Yeah,
that's right.
So so it's kind of like an interesting connection. Like, he kind of maybe starts with the shroud and ends with the shroud.
This is totally just a footnote, but the latest documentary I saw with the computer generation and the 3D printing and the whole bit they've got now, they were actually able to take the negative image, turn it into a positive image, and turn it into a 3D... I don't know if it was more like a 3D printing sculpture type of thing, but a 3D image of the face of Christ. Oh my gosh, blow you away. Blow you away. The story of the wrongly convicted alleged killer, Mr. Hicks there, he gets an apology from Lee because he had missed the truth. Now, he answers from his near deathbed that Lee did not want to see it. Was God using this other hard-to-swallow story to open Lee's eyes? Isn't that exactly what was happening in the religious side of it? He just didn't want to see the truth.
Definitely intervention.
Yeah, that was
Divine
a parallel
intervention.
Right.
Yeah, that was a parallel we were talking before. That he saw one thing in the set of facts and had to change his way of thinking before he could see the other.
What role would you say, if any, did Lee's father's death play in his conversion? Would you say that influenced him at all?
I think it opened his eyes. Like you were saying, that he thought he knew it all. He had to put aside his pride to find out that his father did love him in his own way.
And I think it was also the words that you heard of the priest or the pastor at the funeral at the cemetery, because that's the only part that you heard. There was no funeral, there was no eulogy or anything. You just heard the prayers of the priest at the cemetery. So maybe that was another. Maybe it was a burying, but it was also maybe God talking to him, and he just didn't know it.
He was finally hearing.
Yeah.
He was listening to the right words for a change. So. The religion reporter, I like him. He was great. He goes out on a limb, and he doesn't say to Lee, he doesn't say, have faith. He challenges him to be the great reporter that he claims to be, and follow the facts instead of blaming everybody else for the gaps. Was that the right approach from that religion editor?
Very effective.
Very effective. Why?
Yeah, effective because Lee, if he listens to that, has no place else to go but to close his research. And,
yeah, he was almost calling his bluff there. I think you're such a big shot,
Yeah.
Finally, were Lee's prayers, would you call them the catalyst, much like St. Helena's prayers for Constantine? Or would God have gone after Lee after all, would you say?
I think God was always after Lee, but he needed the prayers. I think the prayers did. Every time she said the same prayer, and you could see his heart gradually softening.
You let him play his game, and then like I said, they kind of made eye contact at the end, and like with the shroud and with Lee looking at the shroud, and he's kind of like God putting his hands on his hip, saying, "You done?
Uh-huh.
You win. Fine."
Well, I wonder if her prayer was helping her hold on
Oh, that's right.
long enough for him to come around. Because, that could be another whole show. How much do our prayers contribute to the outcome of a situation? Is God going to do it anyway? Of course he is. But how do those
But that's
two
right.
things
It
go
helped
together?
her, because can you imagine your husband saying, 2 years, I'll give you 2 years?
Yeah.
I mean, how devastating that would be.
I know, especially on date night when he said that.
I know.
Well, I guess we knew here that we would have a happy ending since it was a true story. Not every come to Jesus story ends that way. Some come into a church for a while and then give up, and then some lose family and friends, believe it or not, with either their over-the-top zeal of a convert or the fact that they've changed teams. The Protestant family doesn't like the Catholic convert, the Catholic family doesn't like the Protestant convert. I love the feature stories, and it shows. I was saying my favorite show is, or one of them is, The Journey Home, where it shows converts from every religion you can think of, or no religion, coming to the Catholic Church. And the number of converted clergymen from other faiths is astounding, at least to me. I don't have the numbers, but there's enough stories out there to make it fascinating. And I would like to say that Catholic radio is a big contributor to people surfing at night, and they hear something and then they listen again, and the next thing you know, they're knocking on the RCIA door. But whatever path you take to come to God, as I sit here with, 2 converts, I urge you to give God a chance. You may not love him yet, but you know what? He loves you. This is Jean Verhoeven for Scripts and Scriptures. May the angels protect you and heaven accept you. Thanks for listening. Here's a bonus feature from my other show, Verhoeven's Sake. Enjoy. Now what? Now what? You find the teenagers in front of you in church distracting, since their shorts are way beyond short, and the spaghetti straps are quite revealing. In fact, the whole family's wardrobe is beyond casual. It would not be proper for a business meeting. You saw the mother at one last week in a suit. They weren't dressed for a nice party. You've been to their open house. They weren't dressed well enough for a wedding or funeral. Isn't the celebration of Mass, complete with weekly miracle and the presence of God himself, worth the effort of dressing nicely? Isn't it a pretty huge celebration? Should you be keeping your mind on your prayers? Should you be on your knees grateful that they are there as a family? Would God care what they wore as long as they came? Should there be enough respect to be neat and modest in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament? Shouldn't the honor of celebrating Mass be cause for celebration and respect for God and oneself? Is there a happy medium? Whose scale do you use? Do you tell an usher? A priest? Do you somehow broach the subject ever so gently with the family on the way out? On another occasion, do you talk about them behind their back? Do you write an editorial in the diocesan paper? Are you wrong to want a respectful atmosphere in church? Are standards just low or inclusive? Are standards needed for fellowship or not an issue? Can it be a community without guidelines? Have we lost respect for ourselves and therefore all institutions? Should you stand up for your beliefs or mind your own business?
Now what?
And welcome, and now we have Suzanne, and her sign is something near and dear to my heart because she's got a Susan B. Anthony sign, and who was pro-life, even though they try to pretend she wasn't. I'm from Rochester, New York, where Susan B. is buried and did a lot of her work. Are you with any particular Susan B. group, or do you just like Susan B. Anthony?
I just like Susan B. Anthony. When I found out that she was so pro-life, I thought that it would be a good defense to let the other side know that she was pro-life.
Now, there are people who will argue with you that she and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was not, but all they have to do is read, and they certainly were. Have you ever heard of the Susan B. Anthony Birthplace Museum in Adams, Massachusetts?
I don't think I have.
Well, it's only about an hour away or less, and it's fascinating. It was where she was born, her house, and they have a pro-life wall of quotes. And it's small, but it's very interesting, and they do a lot of good stuff. You can look it up on the internet. The Susan B. Anthony Birthplace Museum. Have you come to these rallies before?
I've been coming off and on since 1973.
Wow, good for you. You've been in it from the beginning.
I was in it from the get-go. Yep, and I've been probably in Concord maybe 15 times. I went to Washington about 12 times.
Wow. Are you going this year?
No, I'm 74. I'm going to be 75 in February.
Well, happy birthday. No one would know.
I think I'm going to pass.
Are you, so where are you from if you're not from Concord?
Well, I live in Fremont.
Oh, in Fremont.
I'm originally from Massachusetts, Haverhill.
Great. Well, we're so glad to have you with us today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for asking me to respond.
It's okay.
Take care.
Take care.